even when I was reading that segment right here for the video, like I got goosebumps just reading it because it is such a powerful scene. But yeah, that scene I just absolutely loved, and I wished we would have had it in the movie. Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about Dune by Frank Herbert, released in 1965, and I'm comparing it with Dune Part 1, directed by Denis Villeneuve, released in 2021. And so Dune Part 1 is an adaptation of the first half of the book Dune, and so I will only be talking about the first half of the book and how it compares to the movie. So you do not need to worry about me spoiling the second half of the book, and I will not be getting into any spoilers as to what will happen in Dune Part 2. We are just talking about the first half. But of course, I will be covering Dune Part 2. I am planning on that video being released on March 13th. That is the tentative date as of right now, so I am very excited to go see that movie. And if you have not yet subscribed to my channel, now would be a great time to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you will never miss one of my videos, and you can be alerted right when my Dune Part 2 video is released. And even with this book being split in half, there is still so much to cover because there is just so much going on in this book and movie. But before I get into the plot, I did want to give a super quick spoiler-free review for the book and just say how much I love the book and that you should definitely check it out. I am someone who does not like fantasy because the world building, I don't get into it and I don't enjoy it, and I just like books that are based in reality. I like sci-fi, you know, and I have my Jeff Vandermeer shelf. So I like magical realism and I like sci-fi when it is kind of based in reality, you know, like Annihilation, for example. It's a woman in the real world who then goes into this sci-fi world, but it's based in our world, you know? Same with Harry Potter. He is from the real world, but then he's introduced to this magical world. And so I like it when it's based in reality, and Dune is not based in reality. You are just plopped right down into this fantasy sci-fi world. And so I tend to have a hard time with books like that. But Dune, I was surprised how much I loved it. And yeah, there is a lot of world building going on that you need to learn along the way, but it was worth it. And I loved it. And I love the characters. They were all so distinct, and we get the inner thoughts of like every character. And so you just feel so connected to each of them. And the plot itself is just so intricate, and there is so much going on. We have family drama, we have political intrigue, we have witchcraft, and then we have the Messiah trope going on, like, you know, the special one, kind of like Harry Potter, right? Like Harry was the special one. So we have that here too with Paul. But I love the way that Herbert writes this trope because all of the characters are very self-aware that it is a trope, basically. And we get a lot of characters that are very skeptical of it and don't believe it. So yeah, I just thought he handled that really well. And then each chapter also begins with a segment. So there's a character named the Princess Irulan, and she is the daughter of the Emperor. And each chapter begins with like a section of these books that she has written because she has done all of these research books. And so we get segments from these fictional research books, and the little segment we read relates to the chapter we are about to get into. And I love these for multiple reasons. Because one, the fact that this princess wrote all of these research books about Paul and Arrakis and her father and everything, it clearly tells us that Paul did succeed in doing something important, you know, which going into this, you kind of know that he will be a big deal. Of course, it would be kind of disappointing if he wasn't, but I still thought that was a clever way to let us know that Paul does go on to do something huge, right? But also I liked it because the Emperor is someone who is talked about a lot, but we only hear about him through other people. And so same with these segments, we get a look into who the Emperor is through what the princess writes about him because she is the daughter. And then the princess as well. She's not a character we meet in the first half of the book, but these segments that we get from her also tell us about her, even though the main characters haven't even met her. So yeah, I just thought that was a great detail to have those at the start of every chapter. And then George Lucas was also heavily influenced by Dune when he created Star Wars. And so reading this book, it was just fun to catch the similarities between the two. I don't know if George Lucas met with Frank Herbert before creating Star Wars. I would think he must have had to ask for his blessing in a sense, because a lot made me think of Star Wars. Of course, it's not like the same story exactly, but there were enough similarities that I was like, wow, if George Lucas hadn't talked to Frank Herbert before creating Star Wars, I wonder if Frank Herbert was bothered when he saw Star Wars being like, man, this guy stole a ton of my ideas. So I didn't research into the history of any of that. So if you have, comment down below and let me know. Which, by the way, Dune has a huge following. There are so many massive fans of this series, and I I get it now. I definitely want to read more. I have the first 3 books right here. So I will be reading the next 2 books in the series and then we'll take it from there. But yeah, I will be making a video once I have read more of the Dune books on top of my Dune Part 2 video. But then I also want to watch the David Lynch Dune, so I will make a video about that as well. So in the coming weeks and months, there will be a number of Dune videos being released on my channel. And then yeah, super quick spoiler-free movie review. I loved this movie. I saw it in theaters back in 2021. And at that time I had not read the book. And so there were certain things that I was kind of not entirely understanding, but I still just loved the visual experience of this. I love the casting. I would love, like, diehard Dune fans of the book, I would love to hear how they feel about this movie. Because I mean, there's definitely some changes, which we'll get into, but I thought it was a great adaptation. And so yeah, I would just love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. But anyway, from here on out, I will be getting into the details of the plot, which means we will have spoilers going forward. And I will begin with Paul Atreides, who is our main character. He has many different names he goes by throughout the course of this book, but Paul Atreides is the name he was born with. And he is the son of the Duke Leto of Caladan and Lady Jessica, who is his concubine. And Jessica is a Bene Gesserit, which the Bene Gesserit are a group of women who are witches, essentially. They're powerful women who have lots of powers. When they're called a witch, it is done insultingly in the book, so that might not be the best way to describe them, but that is essentially what they are. And then the head Bene Gesserit is called the Reverend Mother. So there is like the Imperial Reverend Mother, and that is like the Bene Gesserit witch that helps out the Emperor, and the Emperor I think is like Emperor Padish or something. He's in charge of like all of these planets, basically. And yeah, one of the things the Bene Gesserit do is they do selective breeding. And so Jessica, she does not know who her own parents are, but she got paired up with Duke Leto and she was told to have a daughter because Bene Gesserit, one of their many powers is that they can control when they get pregnant and they can control what gender the baby is. And so she is told to have a daughter. However, she loves Leto and he wants a son, and so she can't resist. And so she has a son instead, and that is Paul. And one of the reasons they do this selective breeding is the Bene Gesserit believe in the arrival of someone who they call the Kwisatz Haderach, who is a male who will just be very powerful, essentially. And so they're kind of doing the selective breeding in hopes that they will cause the coming of the Kwisatz Haderach. And in the book, there is a point when Paul is talking to the Reverend Mother. And so the way the Reverend Mother describes the Kwisatz Haderach to Paul is, "It is said a man will come one day and find in the gift of the drug his inward eye. He will look where we cannot, into both feminine and masculine pasts. The one who can be many places at once, the Kwisatz Haderach. Many men have tried the drug, so many, but none has succeeded." And she's talking about the drug that Bene Gesserit take in order to become the Reverend Mother. So she's saying men have tried this drug in order to become the Kwisatz Haderach. And so the Kwisatz Haderach will be able to drink of this drug and survive and be even more powerful than a Reverend Mother. And so Jessica, she had a son in order to please Leto, but there's part of her that also kind of hopes that maybe her own son will be the Kwisatz Haderach. And as part of his training at the beginning of book and movie, he does a test with the Reverend Mother called the Gom Jabbar, where they put his hand in this box and he experienced extreme pain. And they say it's to determine if he is a human or an animal, because an animal will just take his hand out in order to avoid the pain. But then she has what is called the Gom Jabbar up to his neck. And if he removes his hand, she kills him with the Gom Jabbar. And so Paul, he is able to keep his hand in. And after the fact, the Reverend Mother reveals that no one has ever experienced as much pain as Paul had. And she's like, "I guess I wanted you to fail because I made you go through a lot." And yet Paul was able to withstand it more than anybody else. And so along with, this Gom Jabbar training throughout Paul's life, he is 15 when this begins. Throughout his life, Jessica has been doing different Bene Gesserit trainings with him where, he can tell when someone is lying or not. And he can also just discern someone's intentions, basically, kind of like reading minds in a sense and just having this sixth sense. But also she is teaching him to use the voice, which is when you say something in a certain way that makes people not have a choice, but to do whatever it is you tell them to. And then on top of that, he is having dreams which end up becoming a reality. And he says how he remembers all of his dreams. And some of them he knows, wow, that was a dream. That was a vision of the future. But then other dreams he knows are just dreams. And so when he meets with the Reverend Mother, he tells her about these dreams. And then on top of, his Bene Gesserit training, he's also being trained in combat and to just be a skilled warrior because he is the Duke's son. And so he has to be a fighter, And so he is trained by two of his father's men, Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck. But then also, all of this is in the movie as well as the book, but an added thing in the book. So there are people called mentats in the book and movie, and they're basically like a human calculator is like the most basic way to describe them, because this takes place in a future that is like beyond our reliance on technology, right? Because in Dune, they have like impressive technologies, of course, and machinery, but they have like gone past being too reliant on it. And so instead of having machines, they have these people called mentats who like are the equivalent of like a computer, essentially. And you become a mentat, like you have secret training. You're not aware you're being trained. But then once you reach a certain age, according to the training, the person has to be told that they have been trained. And from there, they need to make the choice if they want to continue the training or not. And so in the book, Leto reveals to Paul that they have been doing mentat training on him. And he's like, yeah, a mentat duke would be incredible. So like if you become a mentat, you would be an amazing leader as a duke when you take my place. And so he's like, so you now need to choose if you want to continue with the training or not. And so all of these different things that are going on tells us that Paul is very skilled and he is trained in all sorts of things. And he is also very unique and special in some of his, like these dreams he has and his ability to withstand all this pain. And people speculate, some of the Bene Gesserit speculate he might be the Kwisatz Haderach. And then you have his dad who had been training him to be a mentat. A lot of people have a lot of high hopes for him, essentially. And in the movie, there's a part where, so they're on Caladan, and the Emperor gives them Arrakis to be in charge of, which is another planet. So they need to leave Caladan and go on to Arrakis. And on Arrakis, there are people called the Fremen, and they are like this rogue group of people who live on Arrakis. And the previous people who had been in charge of Arrakis, the Harkonnens, they were horrible to the Fremen. Also, as the story continues, we find out how the Harkonnens also severely underestimate the number of Fremen that exist, as well as just like their skills and power. But Duke Leto, he's like, the Fremen could be a real asset, so we need to gain their trust. He sends Duncan Idaho to go befriend the Fremen and show them that they will respect them and they want them on their side. And that is in both book and movie. But in the movie, before Duncan leaves, Paul tells him, he's like, you know what, I had a vision that you died on Arrakis. And if I had been there, you would have lived. So I want to go with you to Arrakis. But Duncan is like, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. And so Paul does not leave with Duncan. And this whole thing with the vision of Duncan dying is not in the book. And then also in the movie, there's a part while they're still on Caladan where Leto is talking to his son Paul about, the fact that Paul will someday be the Duke. And Paul tells him that he doesn't want to be a leader. And Leto tells him, the best leaders are those who hadn't wanted the power in the first place. And he tells him, I didn't want to be a leader either. And so he just has this moment where he's open and vulnerable with Paul. But he also tells Paul, if you choose not to lead, I'll still be proud of you and I'll still love you because you're my son. And so we see in this scene that he's just a very loving, supportive father. He's a good leader and he's very proud of Paul. And we do find all of these things out in the book in different ways. We do not get this scene in particular, but we do see a lot of Leto in the book. And we just get a taste for, the fact that he's a strong leader who is loved and respected by his people. And he is loved by Jessica and he is loved by his son. But then in the movie, we get another scene when they are on Arrakis and Leto gets upset with Jessica because he's like, you know what? I've put up with you putting Paul through your Bene Gesserit training, but ever since he met up with the Reverend Mother, he's been different and I don't like it. And like, it's all your fault kind of a thing. And he gets upset at her in this moment. And this was not in the book. And then also another early vision Paul gets is he sees himself being stabbed while on Arrakis. And we do get this in the book as well, but it's not until like the halfway point. Whereas in the movie, we're getting these visions very early on, like throughout the whole movie. And he is also having visions of this particular Fremen woman who he also just keeps seeing. And he knows that she is someone he will eventually meet. But yeah, so Duke Leto and his family and all of his people are sent to Arrakis. The Harkonnens had originally been in charge of Arrakis, but at the start, the Emperor kicks them off and he decides to give it to Leto instead. And Caladan had been like a very lush, beautiful planet, whereas Arrakis is just this dry desert. But it's valuable because mixed in with the sand is this spice. And so they filter through the sand to get this spice, which is called melange. And yeah, like I said, it's a mix of gasoline and peyote because it is how they're able to do interstellar travel. But it also, like when you eat it, it prolongs your life and it can enhance any powers you have. And it also like makes you have hallucinations slash visions. So it is just like the most valuable thing in all of this like galactic empire. And the people of Arrakis, they believe in something called the Lisan al-Gaib, which translates into voice of the outer world. And they believe the Lisan al-Gaib is a man who will come to Arrakis, who is born of a Bene Gesserit, and he will come to Arrakis and he will lead the Fremen to paradise. And so when they arrive, the locals are calling Paul Lisan al-Gaib. And when he asks Jessica about this, she tells him that that was a superstition that was planted by the Bene Gesserit and that, you know, there's nothing to it. And in both book and movie, we see that Jessica gets this Fremen housekeeper, a woman called the Shadout Mapes. And Mapes tests Jessica with a crysknife, which is a very sacred knife that the Fremen have. And it is made from the tooth of the sandworms, because there are these like beyond gigantic sandworms beneath the dunes. And the Fremen worship the sandworms, and the crysknife is made from a sandworm's tooth. And so there's a part where she like is testing Jessica in order to see if the prophecy is true. And Jessica like knows the answer to what this woman is asking. And so she's like, oh my gosh, like it's true. Like you are the mother of, you know, the Lisan al-Gaib. And then also in both, someone tries to kill Paul with this like little machine called a hunter seeker. However, he is able to catch it in his hand and stop it from killing him or anyone else. And in the movie, it is this that causes them to know that there is like, you know, foul play at hand, essentially. Whereas in the book, we have the hunter seeker, but also Jessica, she is in this like specific room in their palace, and she finds a note left to her from a different Bene Gesserit woman. And in this note, it warns her that there is a traitor in her midst. And so she tells Paul about this note when he tells her about the hunter seeker. And in the book, Hawat, who is Leto's mentat, he believes Jessica is the traitor. And he's the one that thinks she is behind all of this and that she is conspiring against, you know, her own son even. And Leto does not believe this though. And he's like, no, like it's not her. I know for a fact, like she would never do that. And so he does not believe she is the traitor. And yet he still kind of has to keep up appearances and act like he thinks she could be. And he's not able to tell her this. And so he has to keep it from her. But he does tell Paul, he's like, hey, if anything happens to me, make sure your mom knows that I never suspected her. And I always loved her and I always trusted her. But they have Duncan Idaho come back from the Fremen because they're like, we want him to watch Jessica and make sure she's not up to anything. And one night Duncan gets drunk and he calls her a Harkennon spy. And so that's when Jessica is like, wait, what? Like people think I'm the spy? But the real spy is Dr. Yui. And the reader in the book, we know Dr. Yui is the spy right from the start because we get everybody's inner thoughts. And so right when we meet Dr. Yui, we hear his inner thoughts talking about how like he has to betray Leto because the Baron Harkonnen took Yui's wife. And so he wants to get revenge on the Baron by killing him. And the only way he can kill the Baron is by giving him Leto and using Leto in order to kill the Baron. Whereas in the movie, they never suspect Jessica. In the movie, all of that is not there. And the audience does not know who the traitor is until Yui knocks out Leto. So it's not like the book where you know right away who the real traitor is. But also in the movie, it seems like Yui thinks that his wife is still alive and that if he gives the Baron Leto, it almost seems like he thinks he will then get his wife back, kind of. Whereas in the book, like he knows his wife is probably dead. And so he knows that he too will die in this process. But he's like, I just want to make sure the Baron is killed, and that is my end goal. So yeah, as soon as they arrive on Arrakis, pretty soon in both book and movie, tensions are high because they know that there is someone around them that they cannot trust. But in both book and movie, we meet Liet Kynes, who is a Fremen who works for the Emperor. He is the Imperial Planetologist. And so he shows up and he brings them still suits from the Fremen. And still suits are what you need to wear in the desert because water and moisture is so important. And the still suit, you're able to drink the moisture from your own body. And so yeah, so he's bringing them the still suits and then he's going to take them out to go see a spice crawler in action. And a spice crawler is a machine that just separates the sand from the spice. And even though he is a Fremen and Fremen believe in the Lisan al-Gaib, Kynes himself is like skeptical of this belief and he doesn't really believe it. And he knows that people are saying Paul is the Lisan al-Gaib, but he's just like, I don't believe any of that. However, as he meets Paul keeps doing and saying things, unknowingly fulfilling the prophecy. We only get this once in the movie where like he knows how to put on the still suit, but in the book, there are multiple things that Paul says or does where Kynes is like like that fulfills part of the prophecy. And honestly, like that gave me chills in both book and movie, but especially the book because it happens a number of times during this first interaction where Paul will say something and then he'll be like, wait a minute, that fulfills this line of the prophecy. And yeah, I just thought it was so cool. But in the movie, we do have Kynes. However, in the movie, Kynes is a woman. So yeah, they go out on what is called like an ornithopter, which is just like a weird looking helicopter machine to go watch the spice crawlers. And the spice crawlers always bring a sandworm because sandworms are like attracted to the vibrations and the noise. And so once a worm is spotted in the distance, they will call in a carryall, and a carryall is something that picks up the spice crawler and brings it all to safety. And so in the book, they are watching the spice crawler and they see a worm in the distance, and so they call for a carryall, but the carryall isn't showing up. And so Duke Leto, he's like, you know what? We need to save those people. So we need to just put them on our own like ornithopters. And so they fly down there, they save the people from the spice crawler, they fly back up, and then the worm shows up and it eats their spice crawler and they lose all of the spice. But this is just an example of how Leto values human life, right? And he's not like a heartless leader. And in the book, Kynes is thinking of this. He passed off the loss of a spice crawler with a gesture. The threat to men's lives had him in a rage. A leader such as that would command fanatic loyalty. He would be difficult to defeat. Against his own will and all previous judgments, Kynes admitted to himself, I like this Duke. And in general, in the book, throughout this interaction, because Paul is in the ornithopter as well, and he can just tell, because he can sense when someone is lying, right? And so he knows that Kynes is withholding a lot from them, and he's telling half-truths, and sometimes he's straight up lying. And Paul spots Fremen down below after the worm eats up the spice crawler, and he's like, whoa, there's Fremen down there. And Kynes tries to dismiss it in line. He says there's someone else, but in general, Paul just throughout all of this, he can tell that Kynes is being withholding. And there's also something between the worms and the spice and their relationship that he can also sense is important information that Kynes is not telling them. But yeah, the scene in the movie, so they go out to watch the spice crawler and then the worm shows up, is in the distance. And so they call the carryall, and the carryall does show up in the movie. However, it is broken. And so again, Leto flies down to get the men into his thopter. And in the movie, he has Paul get out of the thopter in order to guide the men and tell them where to go. But Paul is like so overcome with the spice in the air, and he kind of like, not collapses, he like falls to his knees, and he has like this waking vision, and he's kind of just like in a daze. And so he almost misses the thopter and dies, but Gurney runs out and saves him. And this was not in the book. And in the movie, it seems like Duke Leto was not aware of the bad conditions on Arrakis. Like after this crawler breaks, or after the carryall breaks, he's like, the Harkonnens left us with shoddy equipment and like they set us up to fail. And he's like surprised by this. Whereas in the book, it's different because Leto, like right before they even left, he knew that it was like a trap and it was going to be dangerous. And also they are like going over, statistics. And before they even go out to see the spice crawler, he knows that the equipment is crap, essentially. So he was much more aware in the book. And in the book, while they're on Caladan, Paul is asking him, he's like, why are we going if we know like we're being set up to fail? And Leto tells Paul in the book, knowing where the trap is, that's the first step in evading it. This is like single combat, son, on a larger scale. A feint within a feint within a feint, seemingly without end. The task is to unravel it. And then also to go along with this, in one of those segments by Princess Irulan, she says, it is said that the Duke Leto blinded himself to the perils of Arrakis, that he walked heedlessly into the pit. Would it not be more likely to suggest he had lived so long in the presence of extreme danger, he misjudged a change in its intensity? Or is it possible he deliberately sacrificed himself so that his son might find a better life? All evidence indicates that the Duke was a man not easily hoodwinked. And yeah, the reason the Emperor took Arrakis away from the Harkonnens and gave it to Leto was in order to get rid of Leto. And so soon after they arrive on Arrakis, the Harkonnens are sent back in to attack Duke Leto and his people, but the Emperor is also involved in the attack. And his force of like military is called the Sardaukar. There's a lot of weird words. I'm trying my best to pronounce them right. But so the Imperial army is called the Sardaukar. And he sends them in with the Harkonnens, but he has them dressed as Harkonnens because he only wants, like the Baron Harkonnen, he's in charge. So he knows that he's getting the Emperor's help, right? But the Emperor wants as few people as possible to know that he was involved in this, right? Because he has to be, like a fair leader. But yeah, the Emperor was involved in attacking Leto. And so yeah, they need Yui on the inside, which I already mentioned. He is the betrayer who he knocks out Paul and Jessica so that they can be kidnapped. And then he poisons Leto. However, he does set Paul and Jessica up to succeed, like he wants to help them. And then with Leto, while Leto is like still aware, he replaces one of Leto's tooth with a poison tooth, and he tells him, when the Baron gets close enough to you, bite down hard, and a poison gas will be released, and you can kill the Baron. Like, you'll die too, of course, but at least you'll kill the Baron in the process. And Yui knows that the Baron won't get close enough to him personally in order for him to use the tooth, so that is why he has to put it on Leto. But yeah, so in the book and movie, Leto and Yui are brought to the Baron Harkennon, and in the book, Yui is killed, but as he is dying, he says something to the Baron being like, you think you defeated me, like you think I don't know what I bought for my wife, but I do, or something like that. And the Baron is kind of like taken aback by this, and it kind of flusters him in a minute, being like, wait, what? Like, what is he even talking about? And then also, like I said, in the book, Yui knew that his wife, he was like pretty sure she was dead. And he knew that he himself was also going to die. Whereas in the movie, I don't know if Yui, it seems like he thought he was going to be reunited with his wife. So it kind of seems like he thought his plan would work out in a sense, and he doesn't have any dying words that fluster the Baron. And so I kind of missed that in the movie, but maybe they just wanted the Baron to seem more severe and intense and formidable. And if we saw the Baron get shaken up by something Yui says as he dies, maybe it would make the Baron look like less of a threat or something. I don't know. But Yui just dies. He says nothing in the movie. And then in both, they have these things called shields, which are just like this invisible barrier around your body. And so the Baron turns his shield on in both book and movie, and then he's talking to Leto, and Leto bites down, he releases the poison. However, because the Baron has his shield turned on, he is fine. In the book, he's totally fine. Like, he is able to leave the room, and he's just like, wow, that was a close one. Whereas in the movie, he is like affected by the poison, and they have to put him in this weird black bath in order to heal him. So he is a bit more affected, but in both, he survives the poison. But Leto, unfortunately, dies. But then, like I said, Paul and Jessica, so they are kidnapped by the Harkonnens, and the Harkonnens aren't actually going to kill them because they often do this, where they want someone dead, but they can't actually kill them because they might be faced with a truthsayer, and so they need to say truthfully that they did not kill, whatever person. And so instead, they will just leave them in a situation where they will most likely die. And so they're not going to kill Paul and Jessica, but they are going to just toss them out into the desert where it is assumed they will die. However, in both book and movie, like, Paul uses the voice in order to get them to ungag Jessica, and then Jessica uses the voice. Like, in the book, she uses the voice to get the Harkonnens to fight with each other, but in the movie, she uses the voice and she just straight up tells them to kill each other. But in both, Yui has left them with a pack that has like different things and to help them survive the desert, like a still suit and a tent that also, captures moisture. And so they are able to escape the ornithopter, they escape the Harkonnens, and when they are in the tent, so I said that in the movie, at the spice crawler, Paul gets out and he has this vision. Later on, shortly after that, he tells Jessica about his vision, and he also tells her in that moment that he knows she is pregnant. And she's like, what? Like, I barely know. Like, how can you know that? And so it just shows that the spice brings out a power within Paul. And we get this in the book, but it is not until the tent. And when they're in the tent, something is going on in his brain that is just so overwhelming. And we read, something had happened to his awareness this night. He saw with sharpened clarity every circumstance and occurrence around him. He felt unable to stop the inflow of data or the cold precision with which each new item was added to his knowledge, and the computation was centered in his awareness. It was mentat power and more. And so in the book, it is in this moment that he tells her that he knows she's pregnant, and he also reveals like so many different things. And in the movie, we do get this a bit as well, where he tells her that he has visions of him, leading a group of people in violence and using, the Atreides flag and things like that. And in both, he also like is kind of upset at Jessica in a way, and is kind of like, oh, like, get away from me. Like, what have you done to me? Like, I'm a freak. But in the book, he was like even more resentful towards her and very condescending, where, he would be saying whatever is happening and she wouldn't be catching up to it. And he'd be like, oh, like, she's so slow. Like, don't you get it? You're so stupid. Basically is what he was thinking. And during part of this scene in the book, we read, you and the spice, Paul said. The spice changes anyone who gets this much of it. But thanks to you, I could bring the change to consciousness. I don't get to leave it in the unconscious where its disturbance can be blanked out. I see it. Paul, I see it, he repeated. She heard madness in his voice, didn't know what to do, but he spoke again, and she heard the iron control return to him. We're trapped here. We're trapped here, she agreed. And so, yeah, like he just said, he said we're trapped here. And part of it is because the spice is addictive. And so if you leave Arrakis, you need to bring some of the spice with you. Otherwise you die because it's so addictive. But also in his visions, he knows that like, we're never leaving here. Like we're staying here. And she, like I said, she agrees. She's like, wow, he's right. Whereas in the book, Jessica, up until the end of the movie, she's thinking they are going to return to Caladan. So it's not until the very end when Paul's like, no, like we're staying here. So that's a difference between book and movie, because right here, right from this moment in the book, she knows that they are not getting off of Arrakis. And something else, which I don't know if this will come up in the second movie, but also in this moment when he is getting all of these visions and all of this knowledge, he also knows that the Fremen are paying the Spacing Guild, they are paying them spice in order to keep satellites out of their air so that they can maintain their privacy. And that is not something that is talked about in the movie. And there is also another big reveal that happens in the tent in the book, but not in the movie. And it is a big reveal. So I'm going to wait to mention it till later in the video in case it ends up being a spoiler for Dune Part 2. But yeah, he reveals all sorts of things in this book scene while they're in the tent. But anyway, so in both book and movie, after they escape the Harkonnens and they're surviving in the desert with the tent and the still suits, eventually they are reunited with Duncan, Idaho, and Kynes, who again works for the Emperor. However, he is kind of defecting and helping them out now. And in both book and movie, the four of them go into this like secret hideout. And we get a great scene in the book where Paul earns Kynes' respect and his loyalty. And it starts out because Paul apologizes for something he had said. And Kynes is like taken aback by Paul apologizing. And he's like, wow, I guess I underestimated you, because admitting you're wrong, like that's not a trait many people have. And so from there, they earn each other's trust and loyalty. And Jessica is kind of like in awe as she sees the way Paul handles the situation and his sincerity. And she's just very impressed with his leadership abilities, you know? But yeah, we don't really get this in the movie between Paul and Kynes, but in both, they end up being attacked by the Harkonnens and the Sardaukar while they are down here. And in both, it is implied that Duncan, Idaho dies defending them. And then Kynes leads Paul and Jessica to another ornithopter, and he, depending on whether it's the book or the movie, they tell them to fly into the desert storm and they can escape that way. And in the book, he tells them to like fly above the storm and they'll be fine. Whereas in the movie, while they're flying in the storm, Paul gets like a vision of a Fremen named Jameis. And this vision kind of tells him what to do and they are able to survive the storm. But this Jameis vision does not happen in the book. So in the movie, Kynes is captured right then and there. The Harkonnens are upset, being like, hey, like you worked for the Imperium, like you betrayed your leader. And she says something about how, you know, like the only person I follow is Shai Hulud, which is what the Fremen call the worm. And she starts like thumping on the ground to get a worm to come, and then a worm comes and eats them all up. Whereas in the book, so Kynes is captured by the Harkonnens, and then he is, again, they can't kill him because the Emperor doesn't want him killed. And so in the book, the Baron just has him injured and then tossed out into the desert where they assume he will die. And in the book, Kynes dies not from a worm, but from like the making of the spice down below underground, and it causes like this whirlpool. And in the book we read, somewhere beneath him, the pre-spice mass had accumulated enough water and organic matter from the little makers had reached the critical stage of wild growth. A gigantic bubble of carbon dioxide was forming deep in the sand, heaving upward in an enormous blow and a dust whirlpool at its center. And so, yeah, the Fremen, they call the worms makers, like a maker. And so we find out that the worms make the spice, right? So that's the relationship there that Kynes was withholding from the Duke earlier. And also, I haven't mentioned this, but when you have a lot of spice in your diet, which the Fremen do, their eyes turn completely blue. Or if you're addicted to the spice and you're just getting a lot of it, like in the book, the Baron's mentat, Piter, he is addicted to the spice. So in the book, he has totally blue eyes, where like even the whites are blue. But yeah, and the Fremen have this dream. Like I said, they believe the Lisan al-Gaib will lead them to paradise. And by paradise, they mean that they will turn Arrakis into a paradise, because there is like water within the earth of Arrakis that can be reached. But because they always have these people put in charge of Arrakis who are just obsessed with the spice, they're not able to turn Arrakis into the paradise they want it to be. And while Kynes is dying, he's like hallucinating the voice of his father. And during part of this, what his father says is, "The masses of Arrakis will know that we work to make the land flow with water. Most of them, of course, will have only a semi-mystical understanding of how we intend to do this. Many, not understanding the prohibitive mass ratio problem, may even think that we'll bring water from some other planet rich in it. Let them think anything they wish, as long as they believe in us. And water being so valuable on Arrakis is a huge thing too that I kind of got into with the still suits, but yeah, water is just the most valuable thing you have. And so there's a part when Jessica is with the Fremen where she is thinking, the unconscious preoccupation with water here weighed on her mind. No, she corrected herself. It was the preoccupation with moisture, and that was a more subtle and profound matter. And so yeah, just like water is the sign of wealth on Arrakis, and it's very valuable to absolutely everybody. And so yeah, the Fremen have this dream of turning Arrakis into a paradise where water flows freely. And Paul also shares this dream, and he talks about it even before it's brought up by the Fremen. And so again, that's another thing where Kynes is like, wait a minute, like maybe he is the Lisan al-Gaib because he shares the same dream we have without us even telling it to him. And yeah, so this is how Kynes dies in the book, is from this pre-mass spice bubble whirlpool that happens. And also in the book, we find out that Kynes, he goes by Liet amongst the Fremen, and he is like the head honcho Fremen. He was very important amongst the Fremen people. And also, this could potentially be a light spoiler for Dune Part 2, but in the book, we find out that Kynes had been the father of Chani, whereas in the movie, it would be her mother. But yeah, we didn't get that in the first movie. Maybe we will in the second. And of course, I need to talk about the Fremen because Paul and Jessica, after they escape out of the sandstorm, they're kind of trying to get by in the desert on their own, and they have a close call with a sandworm. And this leads them to meet the Fremen. And the Fremen are led by, this group of Fremen are led by a man named Stilgar. And Paul had met Stilgar earlier in both book and movie because he had met the Duke Leto. And in this moment, Stilgar, he's like, you know what, we'll keep the boy, but the mom, I don't think we need her, so we'll just kill her and take her water. However, Jessica, she overpowers Stilgar, and he's like, whoa, you have the weirding way, which is what he calls her powers. And he's like, I didn't know you were so skilled, never mind, we'll keep you. And in this scuffle, Paul also overtakes one of the Fremen called Jamis. And so after this, the Fremen decide to accept both Paul and Jessica into their group. However, Jamis, the one that Paul bested, he's kind of is just not liking it, and right off the bat, he's kind of moody about the whole thing. And in the book, it is a few days later, Jamis, he challenges Jessica. So at this point, people, amongst this Fremen group, they're already talking about how Paul could potentially be Lisan al-Gaib. But there's a part in the book where he challenges Jessica and Paul, and then we read, "It is the Amatal rule," Stilgar said. "Jamis is demanding the right to test your part in the legend. She must be championed," Jamis said. "If her champion wins, that's the truth in it." But it said, he glanced across the press of people, that she'd need no champion from the Fremen, which can mean only that she brings her own champion, implying that Paul is the one he needs to fight. And so this makes it seem like in the book, Jamis wants to fight Paul in order to disprove him being the Lisan al-Gaib. And I'm sure also part of it is just his hurt pride, right? Because Paul did overpower him. So I feel like that's probably mixed in as well. But yeah, if you have other thoughts as to why Jamis wanted to fight Jessica, but really fight Paul through Jessica, let me know down in the comments. But yeah, so in the book, he is about to battle Jamis. And Chani, she is helping Paul, telling him some of Jamis's fighting tactics. And then when Paul actually fights Jamis, he wins, and he has to kill Jamis because that is the Fremen law. And so after he beats Jamis, he is then given two new names by the Fremen. So the Fremen, when they are amongst each other, they will call him Usul, but when they are out in public, he will go by Paul Muad'Dib. And Muad'Dib is what they call the little desert mouse. And in the book, after Jamis's death, they now have a ceremony for him. And during the ceremony, part of the ritual is that each of the Fremen, they have all of Jamis's stuff laid out. And so each Fremen will go up and be like, I am a friend of Jamis. And then they share a memory with him, and then they take an item that had belonged to Jamis, and then they sit back down. And so Paul, even though he killed Jamis, he is expected to take part in this custom. And, he had never killed a man before. And so he just is filled with a lot of emotion about this, right? And he's kind of like, wait, what? I'm supposed to say I'm a friend of him? I'm the one who killed him. But he does end up going up, and we read, "I was a friend of Jamis," Paul whispered. He felt tears burning his eyes, forced more volume into his voice. "Jamis taught me that when you kill, you pay for it. I wish I'd known Jamis better." Blindly, he groped his way back to his place in the circle, sank to the rock floor. A voice hissed, "He shed tears." It was taken up around the ring. Usul gives moisture to the dead. And again, moisture is the most valuable thing, including moisture from your own body. We saw in both book and movie, Stilgar, he spat at Duke Leto, but that was a sign of respect because to give of your moisture, that's a big deal. And so the fact that Paul is crying over a dead man, they're saying like he's giving Jamis his moisture, and it gives them like a whole new respect and a whole new way of looking at Paul now. Whereas in the movie, so Jamis, he says he wants to fight Jessica like right away. And in the movie, I feel like it's implied he wants to fight Jessica because the leader of the Fremen is whoever is the strongest amongst all of them. So Stilgar is the strongest. And since Jessica bested Stilgar, Jamis is kind of like, I mean, that means you must not be the leader anymore, so I want to fight Jessica since she's the new powerful one. But then instead of Jessica fighting, she has Paul champion her like they talk about in the book. And so then he and Jamis battle, and Chani before the fight. In the book, she was helping Paul, being like, oh, this is how Jamis fights. But in the movie, she's like, you know what, you're probably going to die. So here's this crysknife because it will be an honor for you to die holding a crysknife. But of course, in the movie, Paul succeeds and he ends up killing Jamis, as we saw in the book as well. And he seems upset over having killed someone for the first time, but we do not get the funeral scene and him crying the way we did in the book. And by the way, I mentioned Chani. She is the Fremen from Paul's visions. And so when he sees her for the first time, he's just like, in both book and movie, he's like, this is it. Like, this is the girl I keep dreaming about. And so it definitely clues him in to, visions being fulfilled, essentially. But to talk about the Baron. So he is definitely an important character, the Baron Harkennon. So in the book and movie, I think it was his nephew, Robin, he had been in charge of Arrakis, but then, they were removed off of Arrakis. And then once Leto is dead, the Baron puts Rabban in charge yet again. And in the book, he tells Rabban, like, to rule with an iron fist, like squeeze them. And we spent a lot of money attacking Leto, so you need to get as much spice as possible and make us our money back and rule harshly. Because the Baron wants Rabban to be hated by the people because he has another nephew called Feyd-Rautha, and he wants Feyd-Rautha to eventually swoop in and get rid of Rabban, and then the people will see Feyd-Rautha as a hero. And so Rabban is just a pawn in the Baron's schemes. And we do see Feyd-Rautha a bit in the first half of the book. He's in like one scene in the first half, and he is not in the movie at all, but he will be in the second movie. And yeah, the movie ends, they have battled Jamis and he has won, and then Jessica is being like, we need to get back to Caladan. But Paul is like, no, like, we're Fremen now. I'm staying here. Arrakis is my home. And so then they, join the Fremen, and in the distance as they are walking along their way, they see a Fremen riding a sandworm. And it's like this intense moment where they're like, wait, what? Are we seeing that right? And so they talk about sand power or desert power. And so it's just a moment where it's like, this is just the beginning. Like, you have no idea what's in store for you. And so yeah, it ends on a very exciting cliffhanger. And in the book, they do see Fremen riding sandworms, and that is alluded to, but that had happened even before the fight with Jamis. But there are a couple things I want to talk about that we discover in the first half of the book that we do not see in Dune Part 1. So some of these things I'm going to talk about here could potentially be spoilers for Dune Part 2, assuming they stay true to this. And so if you do not want spoilers for Dune Part 2, you can skip ahead to, my book versus movie section of this video. But in the first half of the book, we see that Gurney Halleck, who was, one of Atreides' men, and he was training Paul, he has taken up with some smugglers on Arrakis, and he finds out that Rabban has been put in charge, and he wants to stay on Arrakis and get revenge on Rabban because Rabban had killed Gurney's family. So that is where we leave him at the first half. And then we have Hawa, who was Leto's mentat. And remember, in the book, he believed Jessica was the traitor, and he ends up being captured by the Harkonnens, and he still thinks Jessica was the one who, turned them all in. And so the Baron is like, okay, let's keep him thinking that, like, let's encourage that belief. And then, because the Baron needs a mentat, because his mentat was killed by the poison that Leto released. And so he's like, I need a new mentat. So we will poison Hawat, and then like using the antidote is the way we'll kind of force him to be my new mentat now. So now Hawat, like kind of against his will, is working for the Baron Harkonnen, while also wanting revenge on Lady Jessica, who he thinks was a traitor. And then a huge reveal, like what I thought was a huge reveal in the book, when they're in the tent, Paul reveals to Jessica, because she does not know who her parents are, and he reveals that her mother was a Bene Gesserit and her father father is the Baron Harkennon. So the Baron Harkennon is Paul's grandfather. So that was a huge reveal. And then also where we leave off with Jessica, you know, she's being accepted by the Fremen, and because of her powers, Stilgar tells her, he's like, hey, we have our own Reverend Mother, but she's getting really old. So maybe in the future, you could take her spot and you could be the new Reverend Mother. And then to move on to book versus movie. So there are so many details that I didn't even get into just because there's just so much going on. But like I said, I loved the book, so I highly recommend you check it out for yourself. That way you can just appreciate everything that is Dune. And then, yeah, I would also definitely recommend you check out Dune Part 1 for yourself too. Again, it's just so visually stunning, and I think the casting is excellent. And there are so many scenes, like I said, I saw this in 2021, and there were so many scenes that were just incredible, like almost jaw-dropping, because it's just like, wow, like just the music and the visuals and just everything, it just comes together so well. And honestly, when I went into this, I was kind of assuming that this would be an easy case of the movie being better than the book, partly because of the visuals, right? And I feel like fantasy books like this that have such intense world building, which I'm biased because I like watching fantasy, I just don't like reading it. And one of the reasons I like watching it is for the visuals, right? And so there's so many, you know, action scenes and so many amazing, awesome things that are happening in this book that it seems like the movie would therefore be better simply because you get to see all of this come to life, right? And the visuals were absolutely incredible in the movie. And yet at the end of the day, when it comes to which one wins, I'm gonna have to give it to the book. I'm surprised by that because, like I said, I thought I would prefer the movie, but the book really took me by surprise. And again, it shouldn't have, because it's so incredibly famous and its impact just on so many other books and movies, and it's had such a huge impact essentially. And so yeah, and I love the way it was written as well. And again, it was very captivating and it had me on the edge of my seat. And again, all of the characters were so distinct, and the characters who die, such as Kynes and Leto and Yui, their death scenes were just so powerful. And like Frank Herbert makes us care about each of these characters. And so each of those death scenes, like you feel it, right? Even Yui, who is like the smallest of those three characters, you know, we had such a great feel for who he was and his motivations, and that he was still a good person. He just had to betray Leto ultimately. And then yeah, Kynes' death scene too, I just loved in the book, and the way he is like hallucinating the voice of his father. Kynes' death scene in the movie was good as well. How, you know, she betrays the Emperor in order to help Paul, and the way she calls the sandworm to them was a cool scene. But yeah, ultimately, I had underestimated this book, and I was kind of blown away by it with how much I ended up loving it. So I definitely say the book wins. As far as part 2, who knows? I have very high expectations for the movie, and maybe I'll end up liking part 2 movie better than the second half of the book. I don't know, it's hard to say, but yeah, very excited for part 2. And yeah, even though the book wins overall because of just all of the details and just the way it makes you so connected to these characters and you care about them, and they do a great job too at making the Baron just so unlikable in the book. Like in the movie, they do a great job too, and he's just like so creepy and unsettling, and in both, he is like massive, but he has these suspension things that like make him float, and it's just so eerie. And so the bad people, he writes really well too, as well as the good people that you're cheering for. But yeah, and the movie does convey a lot of this too. And in general, I do think this is a fantastic adaptation. It's just, yeah, some of those smaller details just weren't there. Especially the detail of Paul crying over Jamis. Even when I was reading that segment right here for the video, like I got goosebumps just reading it because it is such a powerful scene. So maybe they'll have that at the beginning of Dune Part 2, but I kind of don't think so. Like, I feel like anything with Jamis, it would have happened in the first movie. So I don't see that even happening in the second movie, but who knows? But yeah, that scene I just absolutely loved, and I wished we would have had it in the movie. But anyway, I highly recommend both book and movie. And yeah, stay tuned for my video for Dune Part 2, as well as my video for the David Lynch Dune, which I know has quite the reputation. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Do not forget to like and subscribe. And if you want more like sci-fi fantasy book versus movie content of mine, I have covered A Princess of Mars, which was adapted into John Carter. And that is definitely sci-fi fantasy-esque. But that one is one, like I talked about, where it's based in reality though, because John Carter lives on Earth and then he's transported to Mars. But yeah, so I will link to that one on the screen if you want more sci-fi content. And that is one that I actually really did enjoy enjoy as well. Both book and movie. The movie is kind of controversial though. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Make sure you catch my Dune Part 2 video, which will be out in a number of weeks, and I will see you next time. Bye.